good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming back on. And yeah, no, it's really lovely to have been invited back on. But, you know, fair enough, because I only got through 6 of those 18 questions. So, you know, I still have a bit of work to do. As per last time, just pop your questions in the chat. I see, Karen, you've got a question up there, and do you know what, I can't remember what I was speaking about with that 4:1 ratio, so if you can remember any more details about that, pop that in the chat and we can absolutely revisit that. And my Insta handle is, I'm pretty sure if you just search Mikki Williden, it should come up. I don't think it's anything else other than that, so I'll just pop that in the chat box there. Okay, so it's being recorded, isn't it, Rob?
It is. Okay. We're all good. Yep.
Perfect. And I will just need to share my screen, not leave. Share. There we go. You can see that, eh?
Yep. All good.
Choice. Awesome. Okay, so moving on to that next session, and just to remind you, I've just got the kind of question or the topic up in that upper left-hand box, and then down the bottom I've just got a few cues more for me to be reminded of what to talk about, but of course for you guys as well. So for a fat-adapted athlete, well, first I'll just back the track up a little bit and say, you know, one of the purposes of being fat adapted is to kind of optimize your ability to use fuel when you train and when you race. So you're not so it's not about heading into that race being kind of going on the minimum effective dose, if you like. It's more about kind of maximum fuel capacity. And just to remind you, a lot of athletes who are very carb dominant, they will only readily utilize carbohydrate during training, and they are unable to kind of upregulate their ability to burn fat. But as a fat adapted athlete, you do reach this position where ideally your metabolic flexibility allows you to utilize fat at a lower given intensity, which delays your use of carbohydrate for later on in the race. This doesn't necessarily make you go faster at the end of a race, but what it hopefully allows you to do is sustain your race pace. And that is what we're after. And also, just to remind you, one of the, I suppose, the downsides of being kind of just carbohydrate dominant is it's very difficult to digest the amount of carbohydrates required during a long distance triathlon. So this is why 87% of athletes struggle with those digestive issues. However, a lot of people make the mistake in thinking that if I train utilizing kind of nuts and cheese and hard-boiled eggs, which are good from a caloric perspective when we train and help me feel satisfied, then they're going to try and move that into a race context. And you even see this in literature in and around fat-adapted athletes. There was a race walker study where race walkers were given a fat-based fuel source during their race walk, and you just don't do that in practice, because at that higher given intensity, we can't digest and absorb the fat. So you will just end up having more likelihood of GI upset. So what I kind of coach my athletes through is to go through their training cycle and give their gut an opportunity to be familiar with the type of fuel they'll take on race day. And actually, what type of carbohydrate a fat adapted athlete should use really depends on a number of things, like, you know, like their tolerance for any type of fuel, because some athletes really do have, you know, an iron kind of gut, and they can take on board anything. So, I mean, for them, it doesn't really matter what they take on. However, and therefore it makes sense to try and use what's on race course, and that's no different regardless of what type of athlete you are, because then it just kind of takes a lot of complexity out of it if you are, for whatever reason, stuck without your own fuel. But I will say that that I really like the type that I've got down there, the Generation UCAN and the S Fuels fuel. So the Generation UCAN, and I'm sure that some of you have kind of come across that. I'm just going to bring up the chat box to make sure I don't miss anything. Have come across it before. So, and apologies if I've already talked about it a few weeks ago. It is a type of long chain carbohydrate that is formulated in a way that is quickly digested into the blood and released into the bloodstream quite rapidly. So studies have shown, and there was one that was, I think it was published last year, to show that it was released much more readily into the bloodstream compared to your maltodextrin or your other glucose fructose mixes. And this therefore meant there was less likelihood of that GI distress, because whenever anything is released into the bloodstream quicker, it's not kind of held up by having to be digested into your small intestine the way that other kind of gels and sports products are. And it's also quite palatable as well. Like it's not quite as sweet as a lot of them. So that can be a real favorite for some of my athletes. And in addition to that, one of the benefits for a fat adapted athlete is that this doesn't actually suppress your fat oxidation rates. And that's what the research has shown with it as well. So it is from that perspective, it means that you'll still continue to burn fat in addition to the carbohydrate that you were taking on board. And as a fat adapted athlete, your body becomes a lot more familiar with that and does that quite naturally as you progress. It can take a few months to even years, really, if you listen to some of the the Dan Plews and other long distance triathletes who utilize fat adaptation. So it can be quite good to use a fuel that allows you to do that, particularly if you're quite new to it. Now, another fuel that I quite like is S fuels. Zach Bitter is, I believe he holds the world record for the 24-hour endurance kind of track run, which sounds crazy to me, to go around a 400-meter track for 24 hours non-stop. But hey, lots of people do that. He is, I'm pretty sure he's an ambassador for S Fuels and uses it himself. Dan Plews, who I mentioned as well, and I do believe Rob has mentioned him in the past. I'm not sure if he's been on yet to have a chat to you guys. He is a consultant to this company as well, and S Fuels utilizes, within their fuel it's different because they do utilize medium chain triglycerides, which is a type of fatty acid that we can't store the way that we can other fatty acids, so it's a readily available fuel source. And in addition to that, the MCT fatty acids, the medium chain triglycerides, they are actually ketogenic, and so they encourage your body to produce ketones, and ketones are the byproduct of fat metabolism, which we use as a fuel source, the same way that we would use glucose. So having something like MCT is then actually ends up being quite an accessible fuel source. And as an aside, this is something which I have in my athlete plan, which is one of my online plans that I do, like a 28-day meal plan each month, and I have an athlete version of that. And I encourage people to trial the MCT powder, which is really digestible. I use it myself. You pop it in coffee as an alternative to glucose, so you're not getting that hit of glucose, which suppresses fat burning. So S Fuels incorporates the MCT type of fatty acid, in addition to using branched chain amino acids within their training and their racing fuel. And their racing fuel also incorporates some glucose as well. So that can be quite a good alternative for your kind of fat adapted athlete. And I guess things like gels and sports drinks, they're not formulated in a way that that allows for kind of really kind of utilization of the glucose in the fluid, because they're not, they're formulated to have less sodium than what's required due to palatability. People don't like the taste of the really salty kind of drink. And at the traditional kind of 5 to 8% carbohydrate, studies have shown that it's not really optimal for hydration either. It should be around that kind of 2 to 4% of carbohydrate. So this is where some of the issues come with gels and sports drinks. However, you can kind of train yourself to be familiar with that. And so I encourage my athletes to once a month or something like that to train on their race nutrition as they would on race day, just to get them familiar with the frequency of fueling and also the amount of carbohydrate they take on board. Electrolytes are key, and a fat adapted athlete might, particularly in those initial stages, require more sodium and more sodium and potassium, because with a lower insulin level in the body, because of a lower carbohydrate intake, your kidneys tend to dump sodium and potassium. So you might require more. But of course, actually, you know, this question is about a fat adapted athlete, and to be fair, this is going to have sodium dumping is really only an issue for your just kind of newbie to fat adaptation. But what I will say is I really like an electrolyte product called Element, and bear with me. If you guys can see that, it's this product here, LMNT. And I don't know what the deal is in Australia, but in New Zealand, we have to buy it kind of direct from this particular company. And if you just even Google that, LMNT, it'll come up. And look, if you buy 4 boxes, shipping is free, which is actually a pretty good deal. And this has 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and it also contains some potassium, magnesium, and it's stevia sweetened, and it doesn't contain sugar. So this can be really good. And I have to say, in my experience with my athletes, including those that go to Kona, it can, you know, usually people are underdoing it rather than the other way around. But of course, it's all individual as well. Esther, I just saw your question. So if you were going to use UCAN, do I still add in creatine, BCAA and salt? UCAN doesn't have creatine, BCAA or salt in it. So if that's what you are using as a fuel source, then add it in. What I would say, creatine isn't necessarily required throughout a race situation, but of course I'm completely an advocate for creatine as a recovery nutrient, and also actually just for cognitive health, super important as we age actually. But UCAN will have some electrolytes in it. I can't tell you actually off the top of my head how much, but it won't really have, I don't believe that either S-Fuels or UCAN would have enough sodium to kind of cover off your electrolyte requirements. Yeah, so any other questions around that before I move on to the next question? Cool, okay, so I'll move on. And of course, if you do have a question, just type it in and I will see it. Okay, so this is a big question actually, and to be fair, this is like an entire kind of seminar series on itself, and so that's why I've got a number of notes down there. I've also got some notes just beside me too, just to see that I hope that I cover everything off essentially. So with the problem with menopause is obviously the change in the hormone and the hormone status changes how we feel, how we might respond in training, and how food can actually impact us. And a lot of these symptoms they're due to that estrogen progesterone imbalance. And as you head into menopause, it's not necessarily that you get this like sudden drop off in estrogen and progesterone. What tends to happen for a lot of women is you do have this decline in estrogen, but it kind of goes like this. All in the meantime, in the background, progesterone is just slowly declining. But over time, there are periods of that time where estrogen might be higher and progesterone might be really low. And that's when you get a lot of those kind of the inability to kind of control body temperature. You get the hot flashes. You might get heavier periods or longer period flows, which of course then brings into consideration your iron status, because when you lose a lot more blood, you've got to be more concerned with that. Or you might get a shorter menstrual cycle, so you're bleeding every kind of 2.5, 3 weeks. You might have kind of swollen or lumpy breasts, which might be new for you, or sore breast tenderness that you might not have otherwise had. You might wake up during the middle of the night, and that might be new to you. Increased menstrual cramps. You get the onset of the night sweats. This is particularly as you head into that menses or bleeding. Your migraines around that premenstrual period might actually increase as well. You might notice some kind of new or increased mood swings, which might not be you, like you just might feel a little bit more irritable and a bit more hangry, and everything's kind of frustrating and annoying you, which it wouldn't otherwise if you reflect back. Obviously, as another one as the question suggests, that you get weight gain, which can't really be put down to any changes to your exercise or eating. You can even get like arrhythmias or heart palpitations, another kind of perimenopause, heading into menopause type symptom. And you can also get some increased allergic reactions because of a change in histamine intolerance. And this happens when you do get that high estrogen, low progesterone imbalance. So there's a lot going on. But we can kind of look at it in 3 ways. And the 3 things you want to focus on, and so sorry, there's my family are yelling at each other in the background. Hopefully you can't hear that. So three things you want to focus on are supporting your progesterone, because that is going to be lower. You want to help metabolize and get rid of that excess estrogen, and that's really key, because that will help with that balance of estrogen to progesterone. And you also want to reduce inflammation. And so those are the 3 key areas. And how you do that. So with progesterone, one of the important things that progesterone does is it really helps with the production of GABA in the brain. And GABA is our kind of calming neurotransmitter that promotes sleep. And so when progesterone kind of dips low, that's what can account for those, waking up in the middle of the night. Of course, you've also got those night sweats that can occur as well. But so some of the things which can help with that, I'm just kind of looking at my my notes here. Magnesium and B6 are 2 of the super important nutrients to help support progesterone and support that GABA production. And when it comes to magnesium, you want to look for you want to avoid the hydroxide or the oxide magnesium, and you want to look for a magnesium kind of a citrate or a magnesium glycinate or amino acid chelate. You've also got threonate, magnesium malate. Essentially, the ones you want to avoid are the hydroxide and the oxide. And when magnesium is with B6 and also with taurine, which is an amino acid, and you can get those you can get that in a formula like Ethical Nutrients Stress Formula or Go Healthy. These are 2 brands that are here, and I'm pretty sure they're in Australia as well. Thorn doesn't have actually. So those 2 brands are easy to access, and I would certainly start including that if you're not already. And to be fair, as athletes, you've probably already got your magnesium needs covered. Taurine can go in addition to magnesium that helps support progesterone. Other things which can help are things like valerian, which is a root. Hops actually is a really we find it in beer, but actually it helps with GABA, and it also helps with sleep. I'm just writing those in again now. Ethical Nutrients and Go Healthy, that's for the magnesium. You've also got ashwagandha is a real favorite of mine actually, but you want to be careful of ashwagandha if you have an intolerance to nightshades, because it is in that nightshade family. And I know a lot of people get a flare up of joint pain and their rheumatoid arthritis if they take ashwagandha. That's not you. Highly, highly recommend it. I love it. It's one of my faves. Skullcap and lemon balm are two other herbs that can really help. And then you've also got things like L-theanine, which you find in green tea. Let me see, ashwagandha. There you go, Courtney. L-theanine in green tea. You've got batch flowers actually, so just Google that on iHerb, you'll come up with it. It's really calming, because a lot of what happens to the brain in menopause is actually that you get increased anxiety as well, and that will feed into all of these problems. And you get changes in your blood sugar regulation with increased anxiety and increased stress, which will impact on your ability to shift fat. So it is actually really important. And reishi mushroom. Now, I don't know how familiar anyone here is with kind of the magic of mushrooms, but they're very well studied with regards to just how good they are. And I would certainly look into a reishi mushroom as well. And there is an Australian brand actually, I'll just put it here. Oh no, that's not it. Spell it properly, Williden. Life Cycle, and it comes in droppers. And I when I'm in the habit of it, you know what it's like, the supplements, you go in and out of habit, I pop some droppers in. So all of these things will help. The ones that I've just mentioned will help support your low progesterone. In addition, you do want to have a look at making sure your protein is on point as well, because that helps regulate the neurotransmitter production in your brain too. And I've got protein written down there. One other thing I will say is a lot of people just anticipate, or they accept what goes on in menopause as it's just natural. It's happening to everyone. I just need to, shut up and sit down. Talk to your doctor if it's that bad, because getting a natural progesterone cream or taking oral progesterone, which is different from progestin, it's different from an oral contraceptive pill, that can really help, and I would absolutely recommend it. Okay, so that is the first concept really, which is the lowering of progesterone, to support progesterone. Something else that and I'll come back to that actually. The second one is metabolizing and removing estrogen. And this is massive, because it isn't just that your estrogen's going up and down and up and down, it's having this inability to clear it. So that's something else that's really important to focus on. So ideally, you would try to figure out whether or not it's a metabolism issue, that you're unable to metabolize it, or if it's a clearance issue. So it's things. So you've got a couple of things. Things which help with the metabolism of estrogen include brassica vegetables like your cauliflower, your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, and that contains something which is broken down it's indole 3-carbonyl, broken down in your stomach, forms DIM. And you can take, I'll come to that, Esther. You can take DIM as something that helps you kind of metabolize estrogen. And another thing though is other things that help with this are like your B vitamins, omega-3 essential fatty acids, methionine, choline, zinc, magnesium again. So figure out whether or not it's a metabolism or a clearance issue. Now, if it's a clearance issue, gut health is key. So making sure that that you don't have an overgrowth of bacteria, that you don't have any like really bad digestive issues, getting on board probiotics, and something called calcium D-glucarate is really helpful if you've got kind of gut related issues that are blocking that clearance of estrogen. Now, what can really kind of help you figure out is something called a Dutch test. The Dutch test stands for Dried Urine Test for Comprehensive Hormones, and that's available through NutriPath. And there are practitioners like me, there are certain kind of integrative doctors, naturopaths are also another place where you can kind of order a Dutch test and get it. You do it at home. You pee on a litmus test basically, and it gives you your levels of metabolized estrogen and also your breakdown metabolites of progesterone, just so you kind of see where it's at. Because a blood test is great, but it only tells you a small part of the story and it doesn't tell you all of it. Look, some dietary things which help kind of across the board, which also help with that third aspect of reducing inflammation, are things like this here. So if you do have a histamine intolerance and it does flare up, then you can take something called DAO, and that is an enzyme that breaks down histamines. And DAO, and I always get this wrong, so I need to look, stands for, do I have it? I don't actually have it down here. Google it, it'll tell you, but it's an enzyme that breaks down histamines, and your in high estrogen level can impact on this. So that means that you also following a low histamine diet in and around your cycle, and again, that's something else you might want to Google, which foods are low in histamine and which foods prevent you from producing histamine. And you might want to do that in the week leading up to your cycle as well. Just off the top of my head, histamine is, cured meats, it's red wine, it's, if you eat too many leftovers, these things kind of these have a buildup of histamine in them. And there's it's really easy to find information on that actually on the internet. Yeah, so things which are an issue with regards to inflammation actually, and can really help clear out a lot of these symptoms. I've talked about supplements, but actually what's most important is diet. And so reducing or removing alcohol. So alcohol will prevent that breakdown of estrogen. And so that's why women who drink regularly, who have estrogen issues, can really benefit from removing or reducing alcohol. Eliminating dairy. So dairy has in it a protein called casein protein, which can be inflammatory. And I see this a lot in my perimenopausal, menopausal women. And even the removal of dairy can really help change a lot of that fat storage and that inflammation that they're experiencing. And that's all dairy across the board. I would say that goat and sheep cheese doesn't have the casein protein, so you can get away with a little bit of that. Now there is another protein in whey protein. Whey protein can be inflammatory for some people due to something called alpha-lactalbumin protein, but it's more often than not it's the casein protein. So that's what you want to kind of avoid. Eliminating gluten. Like gluten can be inflammatory for a lot of people, even if up until this kind of point in time you've had no issues with gluten from a digestive perspective, because your body can't actually break it down naturally and it has to launch this kind of immune response to gluten. That's everyone across the board. That's just how our bodies deal with gluten. Over time, if you've got some inflammation present, that can just change the way that your gut responds to all food proteins and increase your likelihood of gut issues and leaky gut. So removing gluten means that you're not going to get that immune system ramp up all the time. It can really help. Reducing carbohydrates. This is a really big one because we become more insulin resistant as we age, and women more so as they head into perimenopause. And that's why, you might be really good on a higher carbohydrate approach, nothing changes, and then suddenly you're starting to store fat. That's why a lower carb approach is so effective for women heading into kind of perimenopause, menopause. And I know that might differ to what you've heard, but that's the reality of what you see in literature and what you hear from people who've really understood and researched this area really well. And it might even be as simple as just utilizing carb timing. So making sure you're getting your carbohydrate post-training to help support that recovery. And then at other times of the day, reducing kind of where you have it. What I will say though, this is something a lot of people get wrong, is that when you say low carb, they just get rid of all carbs, and particularly carbs at dinner time, because carbs make you fat when you eat them after 6 o'clock. Actually, carbohydrate in the evening time is super supportive for sleep. So I recommend that even when you're in this lower carbohydrate paradigm, you want to have carbs in the evening time, because carbohydrate helps your body produce serotonin, which helps your body produce melatonin, and sleep issues increase into that perimenopause and menopausal state. So the more that you can kind of look after your sleep, the better. Definitely increasing resistance training if you're not doing that already, because that just helps increase your insulin sensitivity, because the more muscle you have, the more easily it is for that glucose to be disposed of, and it leaves your bloodstream, and then that will obviously have positive benefits with regards to fat loss, inflammation, and all of that. So if you're not currently doing resistance training, try and see if you can fit it in and around your training, and talk to your coach if you're coached about that. And also really think about your sleep environment and your stress. You know, women, as we head into kind of perimenopause, menopause, not only are you doing your sport, you may be running a household, you may be, you know, including, you know, you're a mum, potentially you're a partner, you might also, you know, be in a place in your career where you're kind of at the top of your game. So you're juggling all of these balls, and you've probably normalized a lot of stress, which in your head you can cope with, but your body physiologically is still responding in that stress state, which is what is leading to this weight gain. So you want to address the stress wherever possible. Now, the other thing is that, and phytoestrogens, and a lot of people shy away from phytoestrogens, like your soy, tofu, flaxseed, because they think that that's only going to increase your issues with estrogen because you've already got high estrogen, but actually it can help buffer that up and down of estrogen in the body. So incorporating flaxseed, ground flax meal into smoothies, into porridge, if that's what you're having, that can be super helpful as well. So Mel, I'll just come back to your question. How to choose the best protein supplement? I always look for a protein supplement that is natural, it's all processed, but that has the less added ingredients, the better. I really like balanced plant protein, or their 100% whey protein isolate. Now, I was talking about being dairy free because we want to avoid casein. You're still actually okay on a WPI, because a whey protein isolate has, as the name suggests, gotten rid of all of the other proteins. So it's really just the whey. So that's a good one too. And then if your protein powder has the protein source, it has the amino acid profile that incorporates branched chain amino acids, that's where whey protein is superior. And it might have a sweetener or a flavor, but it doesn't have 15 other ingredients. That's what you want to look for. And Jessica, how many grams? So that's a really great question, Jessica. It's really individual, but athletes, and particularly endurance athletes, get away with a lot more carbohydrate than your sedentary person, or who you might be kind of looking at on social media. And I would say anything below 100 grams a day of carbohydrate, or 20% of your intake coming from carbs, would be considered low. But, you know, if you've had a training day where you've had either a brick session for 3 to 4 hours, or you've gone out for like a 4 to 5 hour bike ride, a lower carb intake would be kind of 200 grams, 250 grams, you know. So it's it is really individual. What you want to make sure you don't do is that you don't try to stick below, 50 grams a day every day of the week, or 20 grams even, because that's when you really start limiting things like vegetables, like, carrots and tomatoes and onions, and for most people, getting a broad spectrum of those vegetables and some fruits, and also getting your carbohydrate from sweet potato and potato, you can still, keep a good a good level of a good amount of those things in your diet and still be relatively low carb. Like for me personally, I follow a low carb approach, a lower carb approach, but actually, you know, my carbs are still, my percentage diet wise, it's maybe about 25-30%, but my carbs are maybe about, on most days of the week, anywhere between 150, and on higher training days, and then when I drink beer, because who doesn't like a beer? Well, actually loads of people don't. That would actually be up to about, you know, 220 grams of carbs. So, you know, it's relative to your body weight, and it's relative to your training load as well. I hope that answers that question. Cool. So this is a really big topic, and I'm sorry, this is probably too brief, but I hope that you kind of get the gist of the main things that you need to focus on. So really happy to, you know, to talk about this, you know, at a later time as well, if it's helpful. Oh, one last thing I will say, I've got protein plus there. What the research tells us, women over the age of 40, over the age of 45, we need 40 grams of protein in a meal to synthesize muscle protein properly. So usually the recommended amount is about 25 to 30 grams. Women over 45, we need 40 grams. Now, the way I get this, because I'm getting close to 45, I'm only like a couple of years away, I get like my protein powder, and then I get collagen powder, and then I might add some nut butter, and I put it in oats, and that actually ends up being a big hit of protein. And in fact, you'll see that almost every day of the week if you follow me on Instagram, because most of the days I will post pretty much most of my meals on there. So yeah, but that protein is key. And just so you know, just to remind you, 40 grams of protein, it isn't the same as 40 grams of meat. If you eat 160 grams of cooked meat, that'll give you about 40 grams of protein. 3 eggs has about 24 grams of protein, just FYI. 40 grams at every meal, Jill, yeah. And the only way you can kind of, I know for some women that can be challenging, so if that's the case, then what you want to do is have a branched chain amino acid supplement, like a powder supplement, to get in that 10 grams of branched chain amino acids in addition to what you're eating at that meal, because you can get away with less protein when you incorporate branched chain amino acids, because it's the leucine from the branched chain amino acids that is also in protein that you want to be maximizing. Okay, so is there value in fasted training? Yes, there is. There's a load of value in becoming fat adapted, and I do recommend that anyone that's really interested in this, and you really, hopefully you should all be, because again, it's not about going on like no fuel at all. It's about being able to tap into your own fuel stores that even the leanest endurance athlete has stored on their body. And it's when you become fat adapted, you get these changes in your ability to kind of oxidize fuel. Recovery is quicker because you don't get that same oxidative stress that occurs when you break down carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is not a clean burning fuel source. And so we create this, every time we eat, we're increasing our metabolism and get these reactive oxidative species, which create inflammation. Carbohydrate does it more so than fat and protein by a long shot. So the more that we can ensure that our carbohydrate intake is from those natural sources I was talking about in the last slide, and then you're making sure you're getting good amounts of protein and fat, you're going to reduce inflammation and also increase or accelerate recovery. So that is definitely something that we see in kind of anecdotal in this clinical kind of experience. And if you're interested, I haven't got it there, but if you haven't checked out before, it's Paul Lawson and Phil Phil Maffetone's paper on I think it's called, maybe it's the overfat athlete. If you Google that, I can't remember the exact name, but they talk about this whole paradigm where you get athletes who are lean, but they are metabolically, their stress levels are high, their blood sugars are elevated, they are pre-diabetic, and I've seen this with athletes as well. And it is because of the over-reliance on carbohydrate. So definitely check out that paper. However, from a fasted training perspective, even if you were an athlete who had a high carbohydrate approach, there is still value in doing fasted training. And I know that might be different to what you hear, but there are specific training adaptations that only occur when your cells are depleted of glycogen. And this is something that's talked about in this paper here by Impi, which is the fuel for the work required. And, they talk about how, the whole idea that you always have to train with a lot of carbohydrate on board wasn't actually found in a lot of those earlier studies, with which are now used as kind of to form part of the sports nutrition guidelines. And with fasted training, your body upregulates genes that help with that fatty acid oxidation. And so, and that's where you get these enhanced endurance adaptations. What I will say though, is more recent studies have shown that you can take on board a protein-based supplement without carbohydrate and still get a change in that gene expression. So that's great actually for athletes who might struggle to take on board as many calories as they need. And have an issue maintaining their weight, then making sure you're getting calories before, you can still get some of those gene expression benefits. You can definitely improve your body composition when you are fasted training, because yes, you do burn more fat, but actually, overall, it doesn't mean that you, that overall, I think what happens here is that you create that slight calorie deficit that's required to lean up, because you're not incorporating additional meal prior to training. But the timing is key with this one. So, when you become fat, or when you are kind of wanting to go into this and become more fat adapted, it's actually better to do it in a base training phase where you don't have that intensity in your program, and the end performance isn't the goal, because it always comes down to your goal. There'll be times in your training cycle where you want to focus on maybe improving your body composition, and that's where some fasted training is really valuable. But there'll be other times where you want to really hit your numbers in key sessions, in their high intensity sessions, and that's not when you'd want to do any fasted training. So definitely check out that paper. Daisy, you've asked, is that applicable for all ages, even under 18? Do you know what? I would say that what we know is true is that as we age, our cells become more damaged and they age quicker. And so things like the amount of carbohydrate we take on board is much more of an issue for someone who is 45 than it is for someone who is, 15. And in fact, the main issue I have with my athletes, my younger athletes I work with, is just getting that good nutritious food in, to be honest, and trying to make sure we maximize nutrients. Because carbs are really convenient, a lot of people, but this is certainly teenagers, they rely on sandwiches, up and goes, big pasta meals, cereals, and it's to the detriment of getting in really good quality protein and really good quality fat. And they need the fat and protein to help support their bones, to help support their brains, to help support their hormones and things like that. So with, generally speaking, with athletes, I just work on removing rubbish from their diet, and I don't, because just by default you lower the carb, but you don't even focus on it. And certainly their energy needs and their growth and development needs mean that they can actually, and they do for the most part, they need more carbohydrate than what we do as adults. So that's where the difference would lie there. Kelly, yeah, actually it can mean that you're breaking down some protein. that's what you definitely hear that from some people. And I just think this is another reason why, you know, getting your body into a state where it's able to burn fat at that lower intensity, and becoming more fat adapted, will mean that your body will stop breaking down protein and will start utilizing fat as a fuel source. And of course, everyone is different as well. Some of the things which impact on your ability to burn fat outside of your diet, like stress is a big one. So if you're someone who has a high stress load and you're going out doing fasted training and you have a lower carb intake and you're still, you know, bonking in sessions and you're doing what you should be doing to try to be fat adapted, but it's not working, then definitely have a look at other elements around stress and around sleep, because when you push up your stress hormones, that impacts on your ability to burn fat, because that will tell your liver to dump glucose into your bloodstream. That runs out. All your kind of body has to draw on is your muscle tissue. So yeah. And what I will also say with that, Kelly, is sometimes it can be like an underfueling issue as well. So being fat adapted and doing fasted training doesn't mean you're low calorie. And that's another mistake people make too. And that's when you kind of head into that low energy availability kind of realm, which is certainly an issue for all endurance-based athletes, not just endurance either, like strength-based athletes too. Okay, so I already talked a little bit around this last time, like how to structure eating around morning, lunchtime, and evening training, I think, or racing actually. But you know what? Depending on your goals, and I talked about when it might be appropriate to do fasted training, i.e. when you want to try and improve body composition, or if you're wanting to if you need to ensure that you need to maintain your weight because you're dropping weight too quickly. So it is goal dependent. But for early morning training, if you are doing low intensity training, it's probably pretty fine to go out fasted. You know, anything up to an hour, easy jog, easy swim, you know, it's no issue. However, if you do, you know, feel like you need something to have prior to that, then having some of the Mct oil powder, and I talked about MCTs as being part of S fuels, but you can actually just buy the powder itself. And this is the one that I like here. Oh, no, I forgot to add powder on the top of that. You can easily kind of mix that into your coffee, if you have coffee, or even into a drink bottle or something like that, because that'll provide you a fuel that's not glucose, or calories that's not glucose. So something small prior to early morning training that's going to sit in your stomach and make you feel you know, not make you feel too full or too bloated or anything like that. You just don't really want that massive hit of carbs that then will raise your blood sugars and crash them down again, because that will have implications for your energy later on in your day, and also energy for your later training sessions too. If you do have carbs, you want them to be balanced. So you want to, you know, oats with protein powder, for example, means that you won't get that massive blood sugar hit, and because protein will buffer the effects of glucose in the bloodstream, and it's a much more even, and so that can be really good for your kind of early morning eating. And post training, regardless of the time of day, carbs and protein are the things you want to focus on. And you know, this could be a separate recovery meal, or it might just be the next meal that you're having, and that again depends on your body composition goals, because it is really easy to eat 5 or 6 times a day when you might only need to eat 4. And it's really easy to overeat when you endurance train, because a lot of the training we do is kind of lower intensity enough that it just ramps up appetite, but you actually don't end up putting out as many calories as you think you do. So, but what I will say is that you want to try and avoid a lot of fat in that post-training meal, regardless of whether it's morning, noon, or night, because that will delay the delivery of carbs and protein to your muscles and to restock your glycogen stores, because fat is slow to digest. It's really important for that protein to be distributed throughout the day. So that's something, so a lot of people don't get enough protein in the morning. We tend to be protein dominant in the evening time. Now, I already talked about appropriate amounts of protein, which would be 30 to 40 grams, depending on your age. And I believe last time I was here, we were chatting about vegetarian athletes, and they do require the higher end, that 40 grams of protein, because of the quality of amino acids in vegetarian products compared to animal-based products. So, but you want those amounts morning, noon, and night, and potentially in a snack as well. That way, for example, you might be able to accumulate around 120 to 140 grams of protein throughout the day, which is exactly what you want to help with blood sugar recovery, hormones, that kind of thing. And excuse me, I really like putting in my carbs post-training, as I've already talked about, to help with the recovery, making in those good quality carbohydrate. And I also like taking branched chain amino acids post-training too. So branched chain amino acids, there's a lot of research around them and a lot of debate as to their usefulness. But what we do know is that your central nervous system uses branched chain amino acids as a fuel source. We also know that as endurance athletes, we can burn 5 to 10% of amino acids when we train for extended periods of time. So you need more amino acids than what you would otherwise require. And the third point about branched chain amino acids is that the research has shown that they reduce delayed onset muscle soreness. So certainly taking on board post a hard training session, for me anyway, which has been confirmed in literature, actually in science, that they can help reduce DOMS. Mel, you don't need a recovery meal after every training. And if you did that, most people would probably quickly gain weight. I would say you would definitely need to have recovery, like a shake, like a protein shake with water or almond milk for quick delivery of the protein, plus say a piece of fruit. Have that post a hard training session. And by hard, I mean, your Saturday morning brick, or it might be your extended bike ride or long run on a Sunday. That's when you want to have that. Because a lot of the time when we do that hard training, our appetite is low anyway, so it can be difficult. However, if you were to have a meal that was specifically about recovery every time you trained, you'd probably just end up overeating actually. But there is one way to kind of know that, and that's to track your macros, track your calories, and see how they are looking. The last point I will say, if you are having nothing in addition to your 3 meals a day and you aren't recovering properly and you aren't sleeping properly, you probably do need to hit that recovery better and add more calories in, because you could be in a state of low energy availability. So something in and around iron status, and this is real key actually, is that this, a lot of when people get their bloods done and look at their iron status, they can get it back from their doctor who says it's fine, but their ferritin is below 50. And we know that as we age, there is a real correlation between mood and ferritin below 50. And also, I know it in all of my female athletes I see, they suffer from fatigue, weight gain, hair loss, mood problems, issues with sleep, and they've got low iron status. Ideally, you want your ferritin to be in the realm of between 60 and 100. Higher than 100, like quite a bit higher than 100. Say if you've got a ferritin in the 200 or 180, then that can be indicative of inflammation, because ferritin is an acute phase reactant. When you are inflamed, it'll increase. So that's something you want to be mindful of. If you are someone who historically has a low ferritin, and then randomly you get a ferritin of like 86 and you're like, mate, that's amazing, it might be inflammation. So never get your bloods checked kind of a day after hard training, because your inflammatory markers will be raised. So you definitely want your ferritin above 50. We always hear about red meat being important for iron, and it absolutely is, but you've also got mussels, and oysters are really high in iron. In fact, mussels are one of the highest sources of bioavailable iron, and iron from these sources I've got on the slide here is much easier for your body to absorb than and use than iron from plant-based sources, and that's the reality of it. Liver is another really good place to get iron, and a lot of people say, you know, it's a bit of a superfood, and it kind of is. And ideally you'd have vitamin C alongside any of your plant-based iron sources, or if you're taking an iron supplement. Now, you do want to try and avoid those inhibitors when eating iron, or taking a supplement. So if you're, you know, you don't want to have it in and around coffee or tea, or a lot of dairy, because the calcium can reduce down your iron. And you also don't want to have, your iron supplement if you're taking a zinc supplement. Don't have them at the same time. They compete for the same receptors. Now, timing is critical with taking an iron supplement. And we've got an enzyme in our gut called hepcidin, and hepcidin rises in response to training. And hepcidin also binds iron and prevents us from absorbing it. And what research shows is that hepcidin peaks about 3 hours after training. And it can be really difficult to navigate this when you're training twice a day. So the best advice at this stage is to take iron about an hour after your morning training session, before hepcidin gets that opportunity to rise. And you want to take your supplement every second day, because your receptors are actually more receptive to taking on board that iron, as opposed to having it every day. And there are plenty of really good iron supplements out there that don't cause constipation or diarrhea, which I know a lot of people experience when they just get the prescription iron. So you want an iron biglycinate. I'll just pop that in the chat box there. Iron biglycinate. Thorn is a good brand. Solgar Gentle Iron. Gosh, my spelling. Solgar Gentle Iron is another good brand. And like I say, every second day. And you know, when you're looking at the latest reviews on iron, they also suggest that you should build your stores up in base training. And people often worry about iron overload, but you know, for most of us, it's not an issue. It's a genetic problem. So taking an iron supplement is important, and particularly if you know you've got like some key real intense kind of training blocks coming up. So I would definitely look to that. And if you did get your ferritin checked and you were super low, like in the realm of 8 to 12, and I've seen that, you'd want to get an iron injection or infusion and really get it boosted up. So many people go around with low iron, and it isn't just about supplements, but if you are low iron, you can't really rely on diet just to get your iron up. You will need to take a supplement. Having said that, incorporating red meat, mussels, oysters, liver, oysters, you're right. I mean, you guys might actually, you know, you guys have great seafood, but it's not here anyway. Daily, actually, you want to do it daily. That is a great question. So is there research investigating the impact of time-restricted eating on athletic performance? You know, there actually is, and this was a very recent study looking here at time-restricted feeding. Now, just to remind you, time-restricted feeding is when you eat all of your calories within a set window. And often the window set is like 16-8. So you fast for 16 hours and you only eat within an 8-hour period. And I popped that very recent study up, which is one of the only studies really looking at endurance athletes. And what those researchers found was that over 8 weeks, when athletes followed a kind of 16-8 protocol, they weren't told what to eat, but they were just told when to eat. They found that there was no detrimental impact on performance. There was improved body composition in the athletes who ate in that time-restricted eating window. So certainly, so there's research to say, hey, you can be all right with this. But you know what? Like, if you are an endurance athlete, sometimes it can be super challenging to get in those calories you need anyway. And there is real metabolic benefit from eating all your food, even within a 12-hour window, 7 till 7, 8 till 8, which will still allow you plenty of opportunity to get on board the calories you need. I often find with a lot of athletes, because their focus is on body composition, any further encouragement to kind of restrict their diet, and they jump on board it. And I totally get that, because it's about power to weight and it's about leaning up and all the rest of it. But this is when you do, it's just a fine balance between getting those body metabolic improvements and getting the body composition benefits. It's a fine line between that and running the risk of developing relative energy deficit syndrome, or REDS. Having said that though, there are still plenty of athletes out there that might get up and have something to eat at 5:30 before swimming, a latte and a banana, and then are eating into like 9:30 at night, so that's like a 15-hour period. And if this is you and you struggle with hunger, you're hungry all the time, you have difficulty shifting body fat, you've got crashing energy levels, then certainly getting back to that 12-hour windows can really help, because we know that within a 12-hour window, you're going to improve your metabolic markers, improve your appetite hormone signaling, improve endurance markers actually, and also improve your ability to shift fat, if I didn't already say that. Sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought because I saw Karen's question, which I will answer now. One last thing I will say, in rats at least, we find that there are improvements in those endurance markers by when you restrict your food to a 9-hour window, so you have a 15-hour fasting window. And in part, that is because of that upregulation of the genes that are associated with fat oxidation that I talked about earlier. So yeah, there is some research to support it. You just want to make sure you're getting on board the calories you need. And it might be that time-restricted eating, you might want to do it, say, twice a week on an easy training day, and then the rest of the time you're just working within that 12 and 12. Okay, Karen. Okay, last time I touched on causes of leaky gut and eating after exercise. Yeah, so with regards to kind of gut irritation in the athlete, you get an upregulation of inflammation when you train. Anywhere above 65%, your gut becomes a little bit inflamed, and then all the blood from that would be going to your gut to help with digestion is diverted away to your muscles. After you finish training, you get that kind of that increase in blood flow back to the gut, and that brings with it a lot of those inflammatory cytokines, or the breakdown products from just doing the exercise, because there's always going to be those inflammatory products. It's part of the adaptation phase, but you do get them, they're in the bloodstream, and when you stop exercising, you get that rush back into your stomach. If someone has gut problems and you get this increase in inflammatory markers in and around the gut, it does mean it can increase your risk of further kind of leaky gut issues if you're eating. So you do want to delay eating in and around exercise if you know that you have an issue with that. So gut-related issues might be, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, constipation, having to go to the bathroom very, really quickly, things like that. So one of the best things to do in and around that is delay your feeding after exercise. And I can see the time, we probably should finish up soon. But what I will say is, if you Google this, you should come up with a blog that I wrote all in and around that, Karen. So hopefully that helps. Okay. A lot of the stuff that I talked about in that earlier slide, is on this slide here as well. And a lot of the issues around nutrition for menstrual cycles come up with that menopause, perimenopause information I was discussing as well, because a lot of those symptoms are the same. It's that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone. So I don't think there's anything in addition that I will add to that right now, other than you know, like this is something which we could do like a whole seminar kind of issue on. This is again another really big topic, but the first thing to do if you are exhausted, then what you need to do is you need to find out the actual, you know, what's the underlying cause of this. So I would say first get your blood work done. So that's looking at your B vitamins, looking at your vitamin D. That's a big one for us here in New Zealand. I'm not sure what it's like for you guys. Looking at your ferritin, as I talked about, your iron status as a whole, and look at your, you know, your fasting blood sugar, your fasting insulin. Is it like a blood sugar regulation issue? But then, of course, in and around that, look at your lifestyle. You know, are you sleeping? Are you kind of, you know, that whole, you know, oh, it doesn't matter. I've got swim squad. I'm getting to bed at 10:30, but I'm getting up at 4:30. It does actually matter. That does make a difference, because sleep is our biggest recovery tool. So you want to look at your overall lifestyle stuff as well, and look at your stress load the way that we talked about. And I did mention it when I was talking about that perimenopausal, that when we reach our 40s, we are juggling a lot of balls. You know, it's not just our sport we have to think of. Obviously backing off training can be super important, and you know, as a masters athlete, and look, I don't doubt your coach has got you set up like this anyway, but you can extend that training week to not be a 7-day week. It can be a 9 or a 10-day week. So you know, strategies like that and allowing extra recovery can help. Protein is a massive one from a diet perspective. So track your diet. Where are your calories sitting? Where is your protein sitting? So many athletes I know are on 80 grams, 60 to 80 grams of protein, which is half of what they need. And that's what really helps support energy and regulate blood sugar and helps with recovery. But also have a look at your overall training load. So many people are under fueling and are thinking because they're not losing weight, they must be having, you know, enough calories. But there is a concept called kind of metabolic adaptation, which means that your body can run on a lot less calories than what it should be, because we reduce our spontaneous activity, because a lot of our energy goes towards training. We do. And just your metabolism can slow right down, basically. In your blood work, I'd also look at your thyroid markers, TSH, T4 and T3 as well. So these are the things that I would look at when you're looking at exhaustion. A Dutch test might also be useful, as I spoke about earlier. And I feel like I already kind of talked about this. Train low, race high. It's absolutely a thing, and it's a great thing to kind of do, because it does, you know, allows for recovery and adaptation. I talked about fuel capacity and minimum effective dose, and I think that this is this train low, race high is really good, but be mindful of what I was talking about with regards to using fat as a fuel source during training, particularly those high intensity sessions. Regardless of whether you are in that train low, high, race high kind of paradigm, you still want to support your high intensity sessions with carbohydrate, because that's what your body uses. So smaller amount of carbs, and using carb rinsing actually is a really good approach, where you take a swig of sports drink, swish it around your mouth, spit it out. I talked about that last time, I think. So you're tongue has receptors on it which sends signals to your brain to tell you've had carbohydrate on board, even though you're only having a quarter of what you otherwise would have. That increases your ability to push out power. So that's what I would have during your high intensity sessions, rather than taking on board fats during training. Of course, you know, lower intensity kind of zone 2 endurance rides, having hard-boiled eggs, having a handful of salted cashews, which provide calories, but you don't have to do a whole heap of work to, you're not working so hard that you can't digest. That makes sense to me, because you can also help satisfy appetite as well. And look, probably have to finish up. I had a little bit of a conversation about like kind of teenage athletes. Look, it is this. I almost laughed at this question just because I'm a stepmom and I have 13-year-old stepson who really it's, you know, diet is not first and foremost, healthy diet isn't first and foremost on his radar, and it is really difficult to understand, getting kids to understand the importance of nutrition, because it's just not how their brains are wired. You know, the kids don't think like that. So the important thing is getting in calories and getting in nutrient and calorie dense foods. So things like if they're having, so just being a little bit stealth about it, so putting cream and eggs, nut butters, things like that into smoothies. If they're having toast, have them have a smoothie alongside. If you're really worried they're not eating any vegetables at all, getting them on like a multivitamin can be a really good idea. Even the kids' good green stuff from New Zest, you know, it's pretty delicious, and it's got like that broad spectrum of the nutrients and a bit of protein and stuff. And it's interesting. Like, you already tried like Googling kind of inspirational role models, but just you being a role model, it will sink in, and you just have to kind of think like that, you know, like kids won't appreciate that they need to fuel for the future because they are just in the now and in the present. So you kind of just need to role model the way that you would, but also increase those nutrient and calorie dense foods, like I was talking about. Look, things like eggy bread, sure, it might be high carb, it might be white bread, but they're getting eggs in, so you know, I think that's a real win. Eggy spaghetti with cheese, toasties that you might put like baked beans in and pop an egg in with cheese and things like that. Any way that you can like sneak protein or calories in, I think is a really good option. And also, you know, like when you're shopping for kids or shopping with kids or thinking, you know, let's make something for your lunchbox, give them a choice of things, like which one of these 3 do you want to make, rather than do you want to make anything. So they kind of, you give them choice, but they don't really have a choice, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it is really challenging, and you know, something that is a battle for a lot of kids. I'm not sure whether that helps or not. I hope it does. I'm sorry I don't have a magic answer. I feel like if I did, I would probably be a millionaire, because that, athlete or not, is like one of the, you know, something every parent's kind of battle with. And look, I think I'm going to have to finish up. So because it's 9:15. So yeah. Any last questions?
That was terrific. Once again, Mikki, thank you ever so much for all that info. Hopefully everybody's found that really interesting and helpful. And yeah, I just can't thank you enough for all the time you've given us. It's massively, massively appreciated.
No problem, Rob. What I will say is, I know you've got my slides, I'm pretty sure. And what I will just double check, if I go to, oh, that was the last one. Okay, right. Wait, hold the line. my fatigue got the better of me, but if I've got one more, then I certainly will just have to do the last. Sorry, that was a, okay. Last slide. What I will say with this whole, with any kind of racing is that the things that you want to focus on are in that blue box there. Hydration, you'll know, is key, because if you go into a race dehydrated, you will fatigue, because your heart has to work a lot harder to pump the thick blood around your system, because our plasma volume drops. So absolutely make sure you're going into that race hydrated. And in that lead up, that 3 days leading up, you want to make sure you're getting your electrolytes in as well, because it is one thing to drink water, but your body needs to be able to hold on to it. And that's what electrolytes allow you to do. I really like the elements, which I showed you earlier, and also the noon tablets too. They're really good. Regardless of, not really, if this is one particularly for your low carb athletes, if you are a moderate to high carb, if anything, you might need to reduce what you're doing in terms of carbohydrate, because you don't want to overeat leading up. That is actually quite a common thing. But those in a lower carb approach, you want to increase your carbs in the lead up to your race. So you might want to increase it by 100 grams on the Wednesday, Wednesday and Thursday, bump it up to 175 on the Friday, race day Saturday. So you want to up your carb and drop your fat slightly. So within the realm of that 100 to 175 grams a day. And that, that's like a good kind of medium-sized sweet potato, a couple of pieces of fruit. It's actually not as hard as what you might think to get that up. Particularly if you have issues with fiber and nerves, you want to reduce your fiber, reduce your vegetable intake, and kind of switch to those low residue foods. So for example, instead of having a big fibrous raw salad, you might want to stick to, say, rice, salmon, broccoli, for example. That's like a super easy kind of, race pre-race dinner. Chicken, sweet potato, green beans or something. So, and you need to allow for room for that additional carbohydrate as well, because you don't want to feel overfull and over bloated. And also, make sure you eat that dinner meal earlier. So you might have finished dinner by 6 if you know that you need time to digest and you need that food out of your stomach, because that's what makes you feel comfortable. You could have a small snack later on in the evening time if you're feeling a little bit hungry. There's no problem with doing that. And I would also say, practice your race day nutrition. That's real critical, and I know that you'll probably do that anyway, but don't rock on up to a race and try their race nutrition for the first time on race day. Something I really like, and a lot of my athletes like before races, I like banana pancakes. They might be like eggs whizzed up with a banana, then you put some peanut butter with it, so you've got a good balance of protein, carbs and fat. Protein shake with a couple of scrambled eggs. Toast might be gluten-free, peanut butter with, again, with like maybe a protein shake or something like that. Or you might have nothing, like everyone's really individual as to what really works for them. But the important thing is that you've restocked your glycogen, which is your muscle carbohydrate stores, and they'll be well topped up on race day anyway. And all it takes is a few sprints for your liver to start converting them into glucose. I did a false start. Do you know what I did? A false stop, actually, Rob. I kind of did that thing that the musicians do, where they go, "Oh, I know, it's all over, people," and then everyone's like, "No, come back, do the encore." And it's kind of like I did an encore. So yeah. Hey, you are welcome to everyone. I'm glad that you got some good things from it, and I'm so sorry, but I mean, we're all athletes here. You know what it's like. It's 9:20. I'm sure it's like, for all of you, that would be past your bedtime as well. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. And like I said, some of those topics, they are topics within themselves. So, if there was anything that anyone wanted me to expand on further as a separate topic, we could absolutely have a chat about whether, if that's appropriate and whether you'd want it and whatnot, because I'm real happy to come on again.